Hi, it's Neil and LeBron. It's the Neil and LeBron Hour of Philosophy. So that's what we're gonna do. I want to pick up from where we left off the last video, and we were talking about the apology, and we had talked about that key paragraph on page 41 where Socrates poses the question, what is the good life? How shall I live my life? What is the good life? The good life is the life of self-examination. And so we got to the point where we wanted to know, what is examination? How do we examine ourselves and others? And as we saw, we may remember from that video, Socrates says that he does not have the option of examining himself by himself. That in order to know who you are, you've got to question and examine and investigate other people, and that's what he is doing. So the question then, and perhaps I took this away too quickly, is what is examination? And and we see what examination is when we get to what I have called, or what I call, Socrates and the Delphic Oracle. And that has to do with Socrates explaining why it is he's in the trouble that he is in. So Socrates believes, that the charges against him are false. You could understand why he'd be in trouble if the charges were true, but he believes they're false. That's what he does when he argues against the five charges, the three earlier charges and the two later charges. So Socrates has to explain why it is he is in the situation he is in. And Socrates' explanation is that he says that he's in the bad situation that he's in because he's got a bad reputation. And so what Socrates does on page 25 is he starts explaining why it is he has a bad reputation. And as I've said before, I'd like you to have your book in front of you. It's the best way to do this. Yes, you could listen to the music of my voice, but I think that alone will probably put you to sleep. So a way of focusing on this is to have your book. And the book, Five Dialogues, we're reading the Apology on page 25. Socrates talks about how he has gotten to be in his situation, and saying that he has a bad reputation. And he says on page 25, he says, one of you might perhaps interrupt me and say, but Socrates, what is your occupation? From where have these slanders come? I mean, why were these rumors floating around about him? And that he studies things in the sky and below the earth, that he makes the worse into the stronger argument. Why were those rumors around? And so he says on page 25, he says, anyone who says that seems to be right, who says that he's got a bad reputation, seems to be right, and I will try to show you what has caused this reputation and slander. Listen then, perhaps some of you will think I am jesting, but be sure that all that I shall say is true. What has caused my reputation, that's what he's explaining, his bad reputation, what has caused my reputation is none other than a certain kind of wisdom. What kind of wisdom? Human wisdom, perhaps. It may be that I really possess this, while those whom I mentioned just now are wise with a wisdom more than human, else I cannot explain it. So Socrates makes this distinction between human wisdom and more than human wisdom. So so there's two kinds of wisdoms that he's going to talk about, and that's what he proceeds to do on page 25, page 26, and page 27, which is what we're going to look at. So he says, so he starts to talk about his bad reputation, and he says at the bottom of page 25, he says he's going to tell a story, and the story is from a trustworthy source, as he says. He says, I shall call upon the God at Delphi as witness to the evidence and nature of my wisdom, if it be such. You know Chaerephon, he was my friend from youth and the friend of most of you, as you shared his exile and your return. You surely know the kind of man he was, how impulsive in any course of action. He went to Delphi at one time and ventured to ask the oracle. He asked if any man was wiser than I, and the Pythian replied that no one was wiser. Chaerephon is dead, but his brother will testify to you about this. So Socrates is making his case in front of the jury. 500 people on the jury, probably a couple thousand in attendance. It's kind of an arena. He's in the center of it, making his plea. People shout at him and so on. It's why he occasionally says, "Please don't create a disturbance." They're booing him and yelling at him. So he says, and he says his friend Chaerephon went to this oracle at Delphi. Well, the oracle at Delphi, it's a temple at Delphi, commonly called the Delphic Oracle. It was an oracle of prophecy, of reason and prophecy. People went to it to find out what their futures were. They went to find out what an omen, a bad or a good omen might be. If you're walking along the street and, a bird falls out of the sky in front of you, you might think that it meant something nasty for you. So you would go to the oracle at Delphi, the temple at Delphi. It's actually cut in the hills outside of Athens, and I have been there, and it's an incredibly cool place. It just looks out on mountains, and these are the ruins of the temple. 2,500 years after Socrates refers to it, or 2,400. So his friend Chaerephon goes to the oracle, asks, who is the wisest man? And the oracle apparently says, no one is wiser than Socrates. And so Chaerephon is dead, but his brother is there in the among the audience and the viewers to testify that this is what Chaerephon did and what he heard. And remember, Socrates is explaining why he has a bad reputation. So he says then on page 26, he says, consider that I tell you this story. Consider that I tell you this because I would inform you about the origin of the slander. When I heard of this reply, I asked myself, whatever does the god mean? What is his riddle? I am very conscious that I am not wise at all. What then does he mean by saying that I am the wisest? For surely he does not lie. It is not legitimate for him to do so. For a long time I was at a loss as to his meaning, then I very reluctantly turned to some such investigation as this. So Socrates is about to explain to us how he got his bad reputation, and he relates it to the oracle, saying that no one is wiser than he is, that he's the wisest man. And he says, that he had to understand the riddle. He says, when I heard of this reply, I asked myself, whatever does the god mean? What is his riddle? So one of the questions is, where's the riddle here? I mean, even apart from understanding what the riddle means, what exactly is the riddle? And the riddle is that Socrates believes that he is an ignorant man. He believes as we will see, he believes he knows nothing. And so when the oracle says that no one is wiser than Socrates, Socrates says, well, the oracle is speaking in some riddle, the riddle being, how can an ignorant man like himself be the wisest of all? That's the riddle that he wants to find out. So he proceeds to he proceeds to go out and start looking for a person who is wiser than he is, as he says. Um, so for a long time, I was at a loss as to his meaning of what the riddle was. Then I very reluctantly turned to some such investigation as this. I went to one of those reputed wise, thinking that there, if anywhere, I could refute the oracle and say to it, "This man is wiser than I, but you said I was." So Socrates starts to look he starts to look for someone who's wiser than he is. So as a path of understanding the riddle of how he, an ignorant man, can be the wisest of all. He goes looking for someone who's wiser than he is. And he says he went to those to one of those reputed wise. He went to one of those reputed wise, and he says, "I examined this man. There's no need for me to tell you his name. He was one of our public men. He was one of the politicians." And Socrates says, "My experience was something like this. I thought that he appeared wise to many people, and especially to himself, but he was not. I then tried to show him that he thought himself wise, but that he was not. As a result, he came to dislike me, and so did many of the bystanders. So I withdrew and thought to myself, I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile, but he thinks he knows something when he does not, whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So I am likely to be wiser than he to the small extent that I do not think I know what I do not know." What Socrates says is that he goes questioning, looking for people who are wiser than he is. He finds a politician, a politician who has a reputation for wisdom. He talks to the politician. I imagine that he asks questions like that politicians should know: what is justice? What is fairness? How best should we choose the people who represent us in the community? What is the goal and the point of a community? What kind of people do we want our community to promote? And what Socrates concludes from talking to this public man, this politician, is that the politician thought himself wise, but that he was not in fact wise. So Socrates continues to talk with the politician, and he tries to show the politician that that the politician only thought himself wise, but was in fact not wise. So Socrates sets out on this journey to find someone who is wiser than he is. He talks about he goes looking for and finds the public men. He goes looking and talking to the poets. He goes looking and he finds craftsmen, and with each successive person and with each successive vocation, maybe we can call it, apparently the people that he talked with, the poets and the craftsmen as well as the politicians, they all think they're wise. The poets write poems, so they actually have something to base their wisdom in, but unfortunately they could not even interpret their poems very well. So Socrates says, I thought the poets thought themselves wise, but were not, in fact, when I asked them questions. The bystanders, Socrates says, could explain the poems better than the poets. So Socrates says the poets did not work with wisdom, but with some sort of inborn inspiration. So he goes to the craftsmen. The craftsmen actually make fine, beautiful objects, beautiful, probably useful objects, vases, bowls to drink out of, sitting objects for sitting, and Socrates questions them. He finds that the craftsmen do know certain things. The politicians don't know anything, but think they know everything. The poets do know something. They do write poems, but they don't really understand their own poems. And so they don't really know anything, but they think they know other things. And then the craftsmen actually do make things. They can teach you how to make their object. You apprentice yourself to them, and you will learn from them. But unfortunately, says Socrates, the craftsmen, because they thought they knew things. I mean, they knew things, but because they knew some things, how to make these beautiful objects, they thought they knew lots of other things. So Socrates says, talking about the poets, the craftsmen on page 47, he says, he says, I went to the craftsman, where am I? On page 27. He says, but men of Athens, the good craftsmen seem to me to have the same fault as the poets. Each of them, because of his success at his craft, thought himself very wise in other most important pursuits. And this error of theirs overshadowed the wisdom they had, which is they can teach you to make their fine, beautiful objects, overshadowed the wisdom they had. So that I asked myself, on behalf of the oracle, whether I should prefer to be as I am, with neither their wisdom nor their ignorance, or to have both. The answer I gave myself in the oracle was that it was to my advantage to be as I am. So what Socrates finds when he talks with the politicians, the poets, and the craftsmen, they all think they have knowledge that they don't in fact have. Some of them do have some knowledge, but they think they have knowledge that they do not have. And as Socrates says, he continues to investigate them. He continues to examine them, and he tries to show them that in fact they don't have the knowledge that they think they have. And Socrates says at the bottom of page 27, after this investigation, and Socrates is 70 or so. He's 70 years old. This run-in, as it were, with the Delphic Oracle is 30, 35, maybe 40 years old. I mean, it's 40 years ago. So he's been walking around Athens, questioning people for many, many, many years, looking for someone who was wiser than he is. And he finds that, he doesn't find anybody who's wiser than he is. And so he's trying to figure out the riddle. How could the oracle say that he is the wisest of all when he knows himself to be an ignorant person? So he says at the bottom of page 27, he says, as a result of this investigation, men of Athens, I acquired much unpopularity. He's explaining his bad reputation. The charges aren't true, but he has a bad reputation. And he can't deny that. He can deny the charges, but he is aware of his bad reputation. So I acquired much unpopularity, he says, of a kind that is hard to deal with and is a heavy burden. Many slanders came from these people, and a reputation for wisdom. For in each case, the bystanders thought that I myself possessed the wisdom that I proved that my interlocutor did not have, the person that he's talking with. What is probable, gentlemen, is that in fact the god is wise, and that his oracular response meant that human wisdom is worth little or nothing, and that when he says this man, Socrates, he is using my name as an example, as if he said, this man among you mortals is wisest who, like Socrates, understands that his wisdom is worthless. So even now I continue the investigation as the god bade me, and I go around seeking out anyone, citizen or stranger, whom I think wise. Then if I do not think he is, I come to the assistance of the god and show him that he is not wise. What Socrates is describing here is that in 40, 35 years, he's talked with many, many people, and every time these people think that he is that they are wise, he shows them that they're not wise, in fact. And so when at the end of this, and in a certain sense it is the end, since he is on trial for his life, and this is what he's doing now, is trying to defend himself against these charges. So what Socrates says, that he had to conclude that that he does have a certain sort of wisdom. And what kind of wisdom does he have? He has what we have called before. He has human wisdom, where those who think they're wise but are not have a more than human wisdom. And so what he says is that the God has used him. It said Socrates, everybody is like Socrates. It's like saying that this man among you is wisest who knows that he knows nothing. And so wisdom, according to Socrates, is knowing that you don't know. And and um, and unfortunately, this gets him a bad reputation because he shows people that they also don't know things that they think they know. So, and people who see him challenge and refute other people, they think that he has knowledge, which Socrates says he does not have. So what Socrates says is that, in fact, what's the point of this? Why has the God chosen him? And Socrates says, in fact, the God is wise, and that his oracular response, that no one is wiser than he, meant that human wisdom is worth little or nothing. And that when he says, this man, Socrates, he is using my name as an example, as if he said, this man among you mortals is wisest who, like Socrates, understands that his wisdom is worthless. All right, so that's Socrates' explanation of, that's Socrates' explanation of his of his wisdom, and it's his explanation of the kind of examination that he does. His what he does is he examines himself and others, and so this is what he's been doing for 40 years, and the process of doing that has come to mean that he has a bad reputation. Now, one of the things, so that's sort of that segment. Now, one of the things that we've come across here is a kind of extraordinary paragraph, and I read it pretty quickly, but I want to talk about it now because it's kind of it's pretty much the essence of what Socrates is about. If you get this paragraph, if you understand it, you will understand what Socrates is about, and if you don't understand it, you'll have a lot of trouble. So that paragraph is where he says on page 26, and you should read along with this. I'm going to hold this up, but it's really something that's somewhat complicated. Socrates says on page 26, he says he's been talking to this politician. Socrates says, as a result, he came to dislike me, and so did many of the bystanders. So I withdrew and thought to myself, I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile. But he thinks he knows something when he does not. Whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So I am likely to be wiser than he to this small extent, that I do not think I know what I do not know. I think this is probably one of those parts of philosophy where people read this, they hear the professor, think it's the greatest thing since sliced and toasted bread, and that when you read something like this, it kind of makes no sense. Socrates, I'm likely to be wiser than he to the small extent that I do not think I know what I do not know. Now, I must confess, I do think this is a pretty remarkable passage, and I want to try to explain what it means. And what Socrates is saying really has a certain essential meaning about Socrates' life and who he is and why he's in the trouble that he's in, but it's also has an essential meaning for examination and for investigation and what we must assume and what we must do in our investigation. So this is how I've come over the years to explain this very strange piece that, Socrates, is wise because he's not wise. He's knowledgeable because he knows nothing. I mean, really, what the hell does that mean? Um, and this is how I would explain that. In the early 1980s, I went to graduate school in Canada. I'm from Cleveland. My family used to vacation in Canada. I loved Canada before I went to graduate school there. I love it more now. It's a great country. And so in 1981, I moved to Canada. I was 30 or so years old. And I went there because I had a mentor of mine, a teacher, was Canadian, and he went to teach there, and I wanted to study with him. So I went to Canada, and I moved to the city of Ottawa. And, a move is a pretty big thing. It makes you tense and anxious. And I mean, deep down, I thought, okay, Canada, I visited a bunch of times when I was a kid. It's Canada is kind of like America. It's not going to be that big a deal. So, so I moved there, and and actually in the graduate department of philosophy, I moved to Ottawa. In the graduate department of philosophy, I was the only American. Everybody else was Canadian. Most of the most of the other grad students were Canadian or from other countries. There were some from France, some from South America and the Middle East, and so on. It was a very international department, and so when I moved there, the students would get together. We were all new. I mean, they were Canadian, I was American, but everybody was new to the department. The new graduate students, and so about a week after I'd been there, I was talking with about 3 or 4 other students. They were all Canadian. They were all, I think, probably from Ottawa. Ottawa is in Ontario, and so we're having this conversation. About 4 or 5 of us, and we're just talking about stuff. And in the middle of the conversation, about 3 or 4 minutes in, one of the Canadian graduate students starts talking in French. I mean, just out of nowhere. We're talking in English. This graduate student starts talking in French, and then one of the other graduate students responds in French, and within, I would say, 20 seconds, the other graduate students, the other 3 or 4 graduate students, they're all talking French and English. I mean, they're the first part of their sentence is in English, and then the last part of it is in French, and then there's a French sentence and an English sentence, and some of them are, one of them is talking in French, the other is responding in English. It was very disturbing and confusing. I was totally lost. I felt like a foreigner must feel, and I was a foreigner. I felt like I had a bag over my head. It was not necessarily a pleasant experience. And the problem was, I don't know French. I didn't know French. I had 3 or 4 years of French from like 7th to 10th grade, which means I don't know French. So I couldn't do much. I do know in French the one question that everybody has to know in any language. That question is, où est le restaurant chinois? Where's the Chinese restaurant? I figure you've really got to know that question. The answer, how to ask that, and then you're safe. You've got your Chinese food, and you've got probably the second important question, where's the bathroom? But I can't converse in it. I can read it very slowly with a dictionary, but I can't converse. So I'm in the middle of this, and it's a mess. Well, what happened was my Canadian experience grew into this language jumble. Into this language soup. I was with students speaking all sorts of languages. I was philosophy is written. The original languages are Greek and Latin and German and French. I tried to follow some of the The text I was reading, in German, I have German dictionaries. I would try to locate the word that's translated in English and the English I was reading in German, and so on. So it became this language disaster. And one of the other factors that was in this was that the English that was written in Canadian English was British English. It's not American English. And in American English, we spell a word like labor, we spell it Labor. The British and therefore the Canadians spell labor Labour. They add a U, or from their perspective, we subtract a U. The word color, Color, in American English, Colour in Canadian English, Canadian British English, and there's just lots of words like that. They replicate a letter, they duplicate a letter in a word that we have one of, and vice versa. So the word traveler in British English, well, I frankly don't know to this day if the word traveler in American English has two L's and one L in British English, British Canadian English, or if it's the reverse. And then there are words, unfortunately, in British English that you just don't know what the heck's going on. I walked by a building in Ottawa with a large sign on it. I walked by it. It was on the way to my department. I walked by this building in Ottawa with this as a sign overneath it. I mean, a big sign. It said GAOL. So I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even think about it much. It just was not, I was aware that there was a building with the sign on it. It didn't bother me much. And as it happened, it didn't occur to me that it actually spelled a word. And so you look at this word, and let me pose this, you look at this word, and you think, well, what is that word? If you were to think about it, what would it be? You see this and you go, maybe this is the way that the soccer announcers spell it when they go, goal, maybe it's spelled this way. It's not that. And so you think, Gale, I mean, what is it? So I didn't know what this word spelled. I didn't really think about it until I was reading 5 years after I got back from my graduate school, and I returned to Cleveland in 1985, the beginning of 1986. I didn't know until about 5 years after I got back from graduate school. I was reading a British work on the criminal justice system, and it was British work on the criminal justice system, and I came across this word, and it hit me in the middle of talking about the criminal justice system. You think about what the word spells. It spells in American English is jail. We spell jail Jail. The British and therefore the Canadians spell it GAOL. They spell it. There's two letters that are the same, but the other two letters are not. And you think about it, and it's not like since I've been back, they've changed it to JAIL. This is the way the British and the Canadians spell jail, and so I thought, oh my goodness, and so the point that I wanted to make, the point is that my language, being in this language soup of different languages, spoken and written, my spelling disintegrated. It just collapsed. I used to be a really good speller. In 5th and 6th grade, I came in second place in my elementary school spelling bee contest. Came in second place, and I took pride in my spelling. I still try to take some pride in my spelling, but without purpose, because my spelling collapsed when I was in Ottawa, and so that I started to spell words just misspell words. And one of the things that happened, two words that I misspell in now, and I mean, I know it now because I've figured it out, but two words I misspell. One is I misspell privilege, and I misspell background. And these are the misspellings, by the way. These are not the correct spellings. So you look at it, privilege, what's wrong with the spelling of the word privilege? What's wrong with the spelling of the word background? Well, privilege is does not have a D in it. It's privilege, privilege. Okay, I've added a D. Background, is weird. Background is not even a very complicated word. And the problem with my spelling here, this is the misspelling, is that it's missing a G. Background is Background. I spelled it for years without the G. And then I was reading something, and it occurred to me, I don't think I spelled the word privilege that way. I don't think I spelled the word background that way, and so I mean, it was, so my spelling really just collapsed. The final piece of it was that one of my friends, this was before computers and email, one of my friends sent me back a letter where he had circled about 5 words that I had written. I circled it in red, SP, over that, and so. And that was kind of the last straw. So I thought, all right, what's going on here? I have to figure this out. So I read some of the stuff I was writing, letters and essays and so on. And what I found was that the kinds of mistakes I was making had a certain pattern to them. I mean, the kinds of spelling mistakes had a certain pattern to them. I never misspelled easy words like, FOOT, BOOK, SALE, SINK. I mean, I get those, foot, sink, the other words that I just spelled that apparently I can't remember. I never misspell easy words. But what was interesting in the pattern that I found in what I was writing, I never misspelled easy words, but I also never misspelled really complicated words. I just never misspelled them. And I checked them, and my misspelling of complicated words was 0. The words that I misspelled were what I would call mid-level difficulty words. And I'm not entirely sure how to categorize the word background. That's mid-level to easy. Privilege, maybe it's mid-level. You can see how maybe you would want to add a D there. Knowledge is spelled with a D, but privilege is not. But so the words I was misspelling were always the mid-level difficulty words. Didn't misspell easy words. I didn't misspell complicated words. So I thought about this and I said, well, why is this? I mean, you would think that I would spell correctly the easy words. That's true. But you might also think that the words I would get wrong would be the complicated words. But I wasn't getting them wrong. They were the mid-level words. So why was this? Well, the answer, as it works out, is that I did not misspell complicated words because I knew, or I suspected strongly, I knew that I did not know how to spell these complicated words. And so because I knew that I didn't know how to spell a complicated word, I looked it up in the dictionary. And I like, in what I write, even though my spelling collapsed then and has remained rather collapsed since then, word processors on computers don't help much either. I'm sure you know that. So because I want to spell correctly, the complicated words I knew that I didn't know how to spell. or I suspect as much. So I looked them up in the dictionary, so I never got complicated words wrong, because I always looked them up. I never misspelled easy words because they're easy. You know, FOOT, SALE, SINK, and so on. The words that I'm calling mid-level difficulty words, those are the words that I misspelled. And I misspelled them because I didn't know that I didn't know how to spell them. So because I didn't know that I didn't know how to spell them, I didn't look them up. I assumed I knew how to spell them. Why would you look up a word that you thought you knew how to spell? You wouldn't. And so I didn't. So when it came to a word like privilege, for many years, I assumed that I knew how to spell it. And when I figured it out, and then I figured out that I didn't know how to spell the word privilege, and I was never quite sure if it got the D or if it didn't get the D. It was one of those. Is it this way? Did I correct it this way or that way? So I almost always look up the word privilege. I kind of know now it doesn't get a D. But for many years I didn't know that. The word background, it just did not occur to me that I didn't know how to spell the word background, that I spelled it without the G, background. I thought it was background. Background. It's something in the back. It's round like a horizon. It was crazy. I admit it was crazy. But the point is, I misspelled mid-level difficulty words because I didn't know that I didn't know how to spell them. I assumed that I knew how to spell them, and so I got them wrong. What Socrates is saying in this paragraph that is so difficult, and again, I will put this up here and read it because it's such a key paragraph for Socrates. He says, so I withdrew, on page 26, so I withdrew and thought to myself, I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile, but he thinks he knows something when he does not. Whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So I am likely to be wiser than he to this small extent that I do not think I know what I do not know. Now the truth of the matter is, Socrates, or let me rephrase that. I'm talking about something that's cute and adorable, misspelling. In the whole history of the world, probably there's not been that many horrible things that have occurred from a misspelled word. Many horrible things have happened from illegible words. And if you think about it, why would someone suffer death even from an illegible word? Well, it's doctors' prescriptions and the pharmacists not quite knowing what medication the doctor is prescribing. But that's a longer story, and is already going long. But but not much has happened. Happens from misspelled word in the history of things. Socrates is not talking in his example about the misspelling, not knowing that you don't know how to spell a word, or knowing that you don't know how to spell a word. Socrates is talking about moral and political errors. And so, if you think about it, if you are someone with power, and you think you know how to do things, you think you know the answer to things that you don't know, that is when big mistakes, big errors happen, and they affect whole communities. And if a person has enough power, it affects the whole world. When you are interacting or associating with your friends or relatives, and you think you know how to do something, and you don't, that's when big mistakes happen. Friends share, private moments. They share problems with each other. If some friend comes to you and asks for advice, and you don't know what the answer is, but you think you do, and you give your friend bad advice, that's bad. That's morally culpable. That's a moral mistake. So Socrates is saying that the key to good behavior, the key to being a morally good person is knowing that you don't know. The key to knowledge, the key to understanding is knowing when you don't know. And that what he's saying then, he is selected, as it were. He's the Delphic Oracle chooses him, or says he is the wisest of all, because he knows that he knows nothing. Socrates understands that any examination that we engage in, any investigation, any knowledge that we have starts in our confession of ignorance. And so what Socrates says is that there's essentially two kinds of ignorance. There's the ignorance that is not knowing that you don't know and therefore making mistakes, which I would call stupidity. And a couple times Socrates calls this stupidity. And maybe we can just say it's descriptive and not offensive, but it's not knowing that you don't know. And so you do something stupid. You commit some grave, or maybe a little less grave, moral error or political error. So there's one kind of ignorance that we might call, that doesn't know that it doesn't know, called stupidity. There's another kind of ignorance called Socratic ignorance, and you can Google this. You will find thousands of associations for Socratic ignorance, and Socratic ignorance is the ignorance that admits itself. Socratic ignorance is knowledge and wisdom that is that begins investigation, that begins knowledge. And so what Socrates is saying is that knowledge and wisdom begin with the confession of ignorance. Socratic ignorance is the ignorance that begins knowledge and investigation and wisdom. If you don't admit that you are ignorant, you will never get knowledge. Why would you ever investigate anything unless you believe that you didn't know something, unless you didn't believe that you were ignorant? And so when Socrates says at the bottom of page 27, what is probable, gentlemen, is that in fact the God is wise, and that his oracular response meant that human wisdom is worth little or nothing, and that when he says this man, and that when he, the God, says this man, Socrates, he is using my name as an example, as if he said, this man among you mortals is wisest who, like Socrates, understands that his wisdom is worthless. What Socrates is saying is that our gravest moral errors, and politics is really morality, it's really about ethics, our gravest moral and political errors occur because we think we know things that we don't. Our gravest errors happen with our friends and family and community, because we think that we know things that we don't. What Socrates is saying is that you must always be aware of and confess or admit your ignorance. You must always be testing yourself and ask yourself, do I know this, or do I just think I know this? Let me investigate this. And actually, we have to be kind of, we're in a pretty fortunate position, with these cell phones that we have. We actually have access to all knowledge. We have knowledge anywhere at our fingertips. And so, we can investigate anything. It's right there in our hand. Socrates and most of human history did not have knowledge, did not have information that readily accessible. Now, it certainly doesn't mean that you Google something and you copy it and there you know. You don't know. And you don't know until you've worked with something, until you've labored at it. You do have to work at it. And so the process of coming to know is the process of admitting and readmitting and confessing and reconfessing your ignorance. But what Socrates' fundamental point is that wisdom is based in ignorance. real wisdom is based in the confession of ignorance. So he is the wisest of all because he is the one who admits his ignorance. When he questioned the politicians, the poets, and the craftsmen, they all thought they knew things that they didn't. And so they made mistakes, they made errors. Essentially, what Socrates does then, when he questions people, he tries to show them the error that they have made. He tries to show them that they are ignorant, which therefore, hopefully, then they will go out seeking knowledge. They'll go out investigating and examining things. Because if you don't admit you're ignorant, you're not going to investigate or examine things. The unexamined life is not a worthwhile life for human beings, because the unexamined life is the life that remains stupid, that remains ignorance, that truly knows nothing, and that never gets knowledge. And that is a life that is just, it's not worthwhile. We want to know what we're doing. Therefore, we must admit our ignorance. All right, this is pretty much the main piece that I wanted to get at. It goes back to page 41 to page 25 through page 27, having to do with the unexamined life is not worth living for men. The unexamined life is not a worthwhile life for human beings. I hope you get it. I will probably have some questions about this that you'll get, but I hope this was not too long. It's the longest video I've made, so I'll stop now. Thanks. Have a good day.